Hey guys, so we wanted to come at you again with another video about marriage today because I realized that this season has made marriage in some ways more difficult. For some houses, maybe it's made it a little easier. For some, it hasn't. But the reality is, we're seeing all these things continually about divorce rates going up and domestic abuse rates going up and all these people getting sick and tired of being at home with their spouses and all this kind of stuff. And I just believe it doesn't have to be that way. I believe that this can be a time where your marriage can thrive if you're willing to put in the right effort and do the right things and make sure that you're focusing on the right things. And this Thursday video, the last week and this week and then next week as well, is a way to hopefully help your marriage thrive even in the middle of this pandemic. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about, and so I hope that this is something that you'll take to heart. And today, we're talking about communication. The reality is this is the most important thing inside of any marriage. It is the oxygen to the marriage. It is the lifeblood of a marriage. Communication is vital. And the Bible talks all about communication and the power of our tongues. The book of Proverbs talks about our tongues can either cut or they can heal. Our tongues can bring life or they can bring death. The book of James talks about the power that exists inside of a tongue, and it talks about the fact that, when you're on top of a horse and you're trying to get a horse to go one direction or another, it's a small bit inside of the horse's mouth that directs a large horse where to go. It also talks about a ship and how a massive ship with all this power and energy that goes into making this ship move, the thing that turns that ship one direction or another is a very small rudder on the back of a ship. It also talks about the fact that it only takes a very small flame to set ablaze a large forest fire. And then it compares our tongue to those things and says, even though our tongue is it's an extremely small part of our body, it has this immense and enormous power inside of it. And I think that's why communication is so important. So we need to realize that biblically, that what we say and how we say it really do matter in whether or not our marriages thrive. And so I wanted to read really quickly from Ephesians chapter 4. And I love Ephesians 4, 5, and 6 because it really lays out how we should operate inside of our relationships with our spouse, inside of our relationships with our kids, inside of our relationships at our jobs. It lays all of those things out for us in Ephesians, specifically 5 and 6. But I want to back up right before Ephesians 5, and I want to read part of Ephesians 4. And here's what Paul says in his letter to the church at Ephesus. He says this: "No foul language should come from your mouth." What does that mean? Does that mean you shouldn't cuss at your spouse? Well, that's probably not a good idea. But I don't think Paul's talking about cussing here. The reason I don't think Paul is referring to what we would call cuss words when he talks about foul language is because cuss words are different everywhere. Every society you go to, every culture that you enter into, cuss words, what we would call cuss words, are different than any other society. What is a cuss word here is not a cuss word in Europe. Some cuss words here are actually used very regularly in Europe and in other parts of the world. And so Paul would not have been referring to culturally specific, what we would call cuss words. What Paul is talking about here when he says, "Let no foul language come out of your mouth," he is talking about this reality that there should be no language that comes out of our mouth that tears down another person. And if we do that inside of our marriages, man, the whole environment of our marriage changes because we're not tearing our spouse down with our words. How do I know that's what he's talking about? Because if you continue the sentence, here's what it says: "No foul language should come from your mouth, but only what is good for building up someone in need." Let me tell you something that your spouse is in need of right now. They're in need of some encouragement. They're in need of some building up. So the only thing that should come out of your mouth is something that can build up and encourage your spouse as you're communicating with them. And then it says this: "So that it gives grace to those who hear it." The simple question I would ask you is this: the things that you're saying to your spouse in this season and the way that you're saying it, is it giving grace to your spouse? Is it encouraging them? Is it building them up in the season? Because that's what our marital communication should be all about. So I would encourage you, let's don't tear down. Let's build up. Let's don't cut or tear. Let's heal. Let's don't bring death. Let's bring life with the power of our tongue. Let's bring positivity, not negativity, with the power of our words. And so our words are so important, and communication inside of a marriage is so important. And so I just wanted to take a second and tell you 5 or 6 things that you can do to communicate well in this season so that your marriage thrives. The first thing I can tell you, the thing that you need to do to communicate well is this: you need to read your Bible and pray. The first step in great communication inside of a marriage is communication with God Himself. It is communication, hearing from God through His Word, dialoguing with God through prayer. That is the first and foremost secret to great communication inside of a marriage. So once you've done that, once you've spent time communicating with God, what are some things you can do to communicate well with your spouse? The first thing is this: you got to take time. Good communication cannot happen if there's no time to do it. And so in this season, when everybody's at home and all these things are happening, are you taking intentional time to communicate with your spouse? Are you taking intentional time to engage with them face to face? Because great communication takes time. The second thing is this: you need to make sure you're constantly on the same page. If you'll take time to communicate, you can make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page. The only way to know this is to take time to ask questions, is to take time to ask what they're thinking, is to take time to ask what they want in this season. So make sure that you are staying on the same page by daily connecting with your spouse. Every single day, connect with your spouse to make sure that you stay on the same page. The third thing is this: we have to really listen. We need to be great listeners in this time. We need to hear as our spouse voices their needs to us. Catch the things that they're saying, listen to the things that they're saying, but then we also have to voice our needs. We can't expect our spouse to read our mind. We can't expect them to know exactly what we're thinking. So we have to listen to their needs, and then we have to be okay voicing our needs. That's vital if our communication is going to allow our marriage to thrive in this season. The other thing, we already talked about it a little bit, we got to be willing to encourage our spouse. When's the last time that you've encouraged your spouse during this season? Telling them they're doing a great job at work, telling them they're doing a great job at home, teaching the kids, cleaning the house, whatever it is. Use this time to encourage, to be kind, to give grace, to build up your spouse in this season. Let's encourage them. The next thing is this: we have to be honest. Great communication is honest communication. So we have to be willing to be honest with our spouse. Now, when you do that, be mindful of how they're feeling, of how their day's gone. Be conscious of what they're dealing with as you're being honest. But we have to be honest with each other. That while we are being honest, you do need to think before you speak. You do need to know what you're saying before you say it out loud. But it is a must. Good communication. You have to be honest. And then the last thing we need to do in order to communicate well during this season is focus on the plank in your eye before you focus on the speck in your spouse's eye. Focus on the things that you can control about yourself. Focus on how you can get better in your communication habits, in your communication with God, in your communication with your spouse. And before focusing on something that they're doing or not doing, focus on the things that you're doing and you're not doing first before you go and communicate the things that you want or you need or you see to your spouse. Focus on yourself first and the things that you can control. I believe if you are willing to do these things, I believe your communication will thrive and therefore your marriage will thrive in the middle of this pandemic. I love you guys. My desire is for all of your relationships to thrive and not just survive in any season, but especially in this season. So do these things and I believe it'll happen for you. I love you guys. We'll see you soon.